Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, welcome to our first Child First Effective Partner Practice webinar for 2025. I'm delighted to be able to welcome two colleagues, one from Loughborough University and one from Aberystwyth University, who will introduce themselves, who have been conducting some research into the child's voice in the development of youth justice policy, practice and research. We're also joined by Phil Sutton from Association of Youth Offending Team Managers. This is a webinar series that we run in partnership with that organisation. The Child First Effective Partnership Practice webinar series has been born out of development work that started back in 2015 and 16, where through a joint project where we quality mark youth justice pathways for their SEN practice. We are able to identify some quite outstanding local initiatives which we share across our network. So this is slightly different because we now, for this webinar, have invited two researchers who have looked specifically at, I think, one of the most critical elements of child first practice, and that is securing the child's voice. So without further ado, I would like to invite Kathy and Andrea, first of all, to, if you like, introduce themselves, but then give us a presentation on their research findings. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. So if I introduce myself first, I'm Kathy Hampson. I am a senior lecturer in criminology at Aberystwyth University, and I was a co-investigator with Steve Case's principal investigator on this project, and Andrea Nisbet as the research associate. Andrea?
Yeah, so I'm Andrea Nisbet, Loughborough University, and as Kathy said, I was the research associate on this project. Hi.
So Andrea is going to share her slides. Let's begin.
That's lovely.
And presentation? There we are.
Lovely. That's perfect.
Oh, excellent. So I'm going to just introduce our project, give you a bit of information on what we did and how we did it so that you can see how we found out our kind of findings. And so when we get to our findings section, I'm going to hand over to Andrea and she's going to go through and tell you exactly what we found. So just I'm going to just sort of foreground this with a bit of information that hopefully won't be too boring and hopefully will help you to contextualize what we're doing. So this was a Nuffield funded 2-year project, and it ended at the end of last year, and it was between Loughborough and Aberystwyth universities. Like I said, the principal investigator was Steve Case, and so he's one of the main sort of initiators and proponents of child first justice, and so he wanted to particularly look at collaboration. So I joined with him in developing this research project in order to try and look a little bit more at some of child first practice and how it is working or not working, and just sort of get a bit of reality on the ground. So just to give you a little bit of a very quick tour of child first justice, if you're unfamiliar with it, then there are 4 things that make up child first justice. It's about seeing children as children, and therefore not as mini adults. We need to see them as developmentally different, as cognitively different, all the rest of it. It's important to see them as children, not as offenders, importantly. The second tenet is about developing their pro-social identity. And so all the work that happens with them when they come into contact with youth justice services who are working in a child first way is to help them develop pro-socially, which then takes them away from an offending trajectory and then is more likely to result in positive outcomes for them. And the third tenet is this idea of collaboration with children. You can see that that's emboldened, and that was the focus of what we actually wanted to look at. So this is looking at how much is collaboration really built into what we do. And by collaboration, we mean working with children, that children have a say in what happens, that they get to have a place at that table, if you like, that decision making. And just for context, the fourth aspect of Child First is about promoting diversion from criminal justice systems to try and reduce criminalisation of children, and sort of trying to divert children away from higher level criminal outcomes as much as possible. So those four aspects are what make up Child First Justice. You can read all about that in the latest Youth Justice Board strategic plan, which gives you a bit of an overview of what that is. And so we, focusing on the collaboration, identified specific research aims to try and sort of unpack this a bit and look a little bit more as to what we actually mean by it. So the first thing we wanted to look at is, what do children, because this is all about children and what they understand, what do children understand about collaboration, what it means, what it is, what it could mean for them? Just go back, that's it. And the second question area was looking at the collaboration objectives. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve by working with children, and what are their views on what we're trying to do? And are they the same? Then we're looking at what happens in practice in collaboration. Is it effective? Is it working? Do the children feel that they are really part of this process? They're really being collaborated with? And then sort of leading on from those, looking at practice development. What do children think needs to change, needs to be developed in order to properly embed collaboration as they understand it within all the work that happens with them in a criminal justice setting? So we wanted to access, as it says, the genuine thoughts and feelings and voices of justice-involved children. Often research will look at adult perspectives on all of this, but we wanted to really sort of avoid that and just look at what children were thinking. So our project was entirely child-focused. We didn't ask any adults any of these questions. That's been done in the past. And we wanted to try, though, to help them to communicate in the way that they felt was appropriate to them, that in a way that helped them to really kind of say how they felt. So we had to be a little bit creative about that. So next slide, please. So looking at the methodology, so those things I've just said really identify why we did what we did. So what did we do? We had two different bits of what we did. The first was a project reference group. And this is trying to make everything that we did really participatory, that children could have an impact and an input into the way we did the research. So it wasn't just asking children, it was actually involving children in the very design of what we were doing. So we brought together a project reference group of children and young people from one particular youth justice service, and we wanted to work with them in a number of ways to develop ways of working that the children find helpful, and in order to look at sort of some of the things that we were looking at, some of the language we were using, were the questions appropriate, and also to help us interpret our findings and identify what the children were really saying. So we got them to use lots of creative materials and feedback and see how they worked. We got them to look at some of our questions and look at language and interpret for us into a more child-friendly, appropriate language what we were trying to ask. And we got them to look at lots of the output that our sort of research participants, what they said, what they did, what all the stuff that they did in response to our questions. And so they could try and work out some of the themes. We, in our naivety, thought that we would be working with one group of children from the beginning of the project to the end. Well, we didn't quite think that, but what we ended up with was quite a changeable group, if I'm honest, through the sort of 18 months, I suppose, 15 to 18 months in which we worked with them. So we had a total of 22, 18 were boys, 4 were girls. We had 12 sessions over the period, plus one kind of rap recording studio session that you'll hear about at the end. And so, but these weren't the same children throughout. There was a bit of a changeability as we went through. Children finished their orders, they kind of dipped in for a bit and then dipped out. There were a number of reasons for that, but that was just the way it went. That was the practicality of it. The other part of what we wanted to do, of course, was what you might call data gathering, asking the children these questions and finding out what they thought. So we got a group of 66 children who were interviewed, and I use that term loosely because we wanted to use some of those creative methods to help them communicate. But we use the word interview just because it's what we do in research, isn't it? 31 of those children were working in the community with youth justice services, and 35 of those children were in various different custodial institutions. And we did 75 system journey interviews. System journey meaning finding out about their journey through the system, what they'd experienced, how it had been for them at various different stages. Some of those would have been brief, some of those might have been quite a long time through various different court orders and things like that. So you'll notice the discrepancy in numbers. So we had 75 system journey interviews with 66 children. We wanted originally to get a re-interview with each of these children, but actually we only got a few re-interviews in reality. Again, a lot of that was to do with short orders, children coming in and out very quickly and then not being able to necessarily follow them once they'd left the system, or children opting out, which of course is absolutely fine. So a number of reasons why that we ended up with that group. But we got a good number of really detailed, in-depth responses to our questions, and Andrea, who did those interviews with children, really explored some of those areas with them. We move on. So I'm going to hand over to Andrea, who's going to talk about the research, the output that we got from the children according to each of those 4 research areas.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, it was a privilege speaking to these children. As Kathy said, I interviewed 66 children from both custodial and children being supported by youth justice teams, and it was amazing to speak to these kids. It was really interesting, a bunch of kids that I interviewed, and the findings were fascinating. So on to the first question then that Kathy told you about, which is around collaboration understandings. So what was it that children thought that this meant? It was definitely a term that children didn't use themselves, and we learnt this pretty quickly when we worked with the PRG group, as Kathy mentioned. And in terms of, we looked at what was their understanding of this, and there was sort of 4 distinct stages that they thought collaboration meant to them. So it meant, and this was a theme that ran all the way through the research, asking children their opinions, asking children. Sounds pretty straightforward. A lot of children told me that they weren't being asked their opinions, but that was really important for them. They needed to be asked. I think that some children obviously were very confident in themselves and would obviously say what they think, but a lot of children, if they weren't specifically asked, they didn't feel that they had a voice. They didn't feel that they could say what they thought. So that was a really important aspect of collaboration right the way through all the findings. So the second stage of that was actually listening to children, listening to what children had to say. I mean active listening, properly listening to what children say. And as this quote says on the slide, he listens to me. He wants to find out what I think about things. He doesn't cut me off when I'm speaking. So this child obviously felt as if his worker was actually listening to what he was saying. The next aspect of collaboration meanings to children was about respecting children's views. And this very much meant about, obviously, the active listening. But if you respect my views, you will do something about it. Something will change. Or if something doesn't change, you will explain to me why that can't happen. So that was very much about respecting, and I love this quote. I think it's probably one of my favourite quotes from the whole of the interviews I did. If you're going to arrest, and obviously this is a child speaking about his experience with the police service. If you're going to arrest me, yeah, talk to me with respect, like the way you speak to your own kids. Don't speak down to us, and listen. Speak to us on the level, and we'll listen too. So it's very much having that balanced conversational style of communication, both from an adult's perspective and the child's, but respect those views. And then finally, it was about being kept fully informed. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat this morning, or this afternoon as we are now. So it's about children being fully informed. And again, this was about like before, during and after. So give me information about what's happening, what about the service, about what the things we might be doing. And then sort of during that time, things change, kids forget. So keep that information flow coming. Something that you told me right at the beginning of my order or my time in custody, I probably would have forgotten. So in terms of keep me informed all the way through. And about what was happening, a lot of kids that I spoke to felt as if they weren't sure about what was happening to them. Some of that probably would have been because they forgot, or they might not have been listening, or it might have just been because they hadn't been fully informed in the first place. So that was very crucial to children and their understanding of collaboration. So they are the 4 stages that children told us about what they felt collaboration meant to them. Moving on to the second question then, collaboration objectives. And so this was about what do children see was the point of collaboration? Why are we collaborating with children? What did they think about that? So this was very much about priority. So there's one theme, strong theme that came out of this, the answers to this question, and then with some sub-themes underneath, as you can see. So it was very much about prioritising children's own goals, not things that adults, from an adult's perspective, in terms of what they thought was good for the child. So if you're going to speak to children and ask them their opinions, let's have a look at what they wanted to prioritise, what was important to children themselves. So ask children what they would like to achieve in life. So they asked me what I wanted to do to make it right, so I can get on with my life. So as I say, instead of coming in with that child and saying, right, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, what is it that child wants to do with the time that they're going to be supported either by the youth justice team or whilst they're in custody? And what became very clear was it was about hearing and supporting children's own aspirations. In our study, most children, they had quite normal aspirations of any teenage children might have, and that was very much about getting support with education and employment and training. So that was really important to children. In terms of this girl that I spoke to here, she was really intuitive about in terms of the work she was doing with the youth justice team. It should be based around the child. Like for me, health and social care is my goal. So they organised for me to be on an interview panel with social workers, all the stuff I wanted to do in the future. And so she said, being asked her for her aspirations and being supported with her aspirations, actually, she felt that was the point of her having these conversations with professionals, so they could support her and help her as the next theme came about, so they can get on with their lives. Children didn't want to be focused on, what happened in the past, on negative aspects. They wanted things to be positive and they wanted things to be forward-looking. This is quite interesting in these findings, because when we actually started looking at these findings and thinking about, well, what does this all mean? It actually led us to sort of think about, well, actually, collaboration is a really important, as Maria said at the beginning, an important part of child-first justice. Because not only is it about collaboration, but the collaboration actually helps support other aspects of child first in terms of pro-social identity and that looking forward aspect. So it's a crucial part of the child first justice practice. And then, of course, on to the last point that children made under objectives. It was about children recognise, it says here that YOC can be helpful, but they recognise, this quote is from a child that was being supported by his justice team, but they also recognised that where they had the opportunity in custodial settings too. So moving on then to effective collaboration. What do children think is effective collaboration in practice? So this, under this question, what became really clear, two very standout clear themes here, was about positive relationships between children and professionals, and also addressing power dynamics. Came out very strongly. So a word that was often repeated by children in their answers to the interviews, when I was having interviews with children, was about professionals needing to care. They wanted professionals to care about them and care about what happens to them. So in this quote here, he makes me feel as if he's really here for me, to benefit me. He's one of those people who does actually care. He's not like, I just have to do this because it's my job. Now, obviously, we're all in employment to have because we want to have a job, but children really wanted not just for people to be doing it because it's their job, but actually have that caring element to show that professionals actually really did want to help them change their lives around. Again, what came out clearly going on to the next theme was around power dynamics. So this came out very strongly, especially power play and environments. So this is about actually acknowledging those power dynamics and doing something about them. I don't think that power dynamics is ever gonna, we're never gonna get rid of power dynamics, but I think we need to be very aware of it. Children are aware of it. So I don't think it's something that should be ignored. We need to ensure that it's addressed. So what children said here is they thought it was very much power play in that adults were using their power against them. This very much came out of interviews about the police and in some custodial settings. Children felt that, and in courts, that judges and people in the court settings were using their powerful positions against them. And as this quote, excuse me again, this quote says here about this boy in court, the pressure in there, the court is bad. So it makes you not want to say anything because it's so stressful. Everyone is looking at you, eyes from all directions. So it makes you feel very uncomfortable. The children said, you know, to enable to engage and to be able to have their voice heard, they needed to be able to be in a comfortable environment to do that. So this idea of environments, again, is quite an interesting theme that came out of this research, and one I think that deserves further investigation in terms of what does a child-first environment look like? What are children, what is an environment? And actually this reminds me very much of another one of these sessions that I joined. I think it might have been the one before Marius with the Isle of Wight, and I think it was one of the London Borough youth.
Haringey.
Harrogate, where they very much talked about, thank you, Marius, this about environment being very important. And Harrogate, they had involved children in, I'm going on to talk about somebody else's research now. Sorry, I should come back to my own. But they very much talked about how important the environment was. And this definitely came out strongly in our research. So enable for children to have their voice heard, they needed to be comfortable to do that. And then the third element that came out from our research was that interventions and support needed to be developed together. So, and again, going back to that, not just doing something that the adult professional feels the child should do, but they wanted that support to be developed in collaboration with them. So finally then, going on to the final question about practice development. So what practice development points can be taken from this project? So this area of the research was very much taken from what children suggested about practice development, but also what they identified as poor practice. So that first thing there, again, power dynamics get in the way and should be recognised and neutralised. So children talked about how important it was that we tried to counteract power dynamics. And so this becomes an area for development. As I've spoken about, we can't ignore it. It needs to be recognised. Children recognise it themselves. So there's, you know, the point is that they realise that. So we need to do everything we can to counteract that power play that's going on. And again, this quote here from a boy that was in involvement with the police when he was being arrested. The police, they were asking me stuff, but I think they'd already made up their minds about what would happen. They weren't really listening and taking any notice. They ask because they have to, but they don't do out. So he felt that, you know, that they were just doing it for the sake of it. So very much, you know, they were asking, but they weren't going to do anything about it. So we need to recognise that power play is going on and address it. And also the children being involved in decision making at all levels. This was both strategic and practice. I mentioned in one of the previous slides where a girl had been supported to take part in interviews. So there was another boy that I spoke to in terms of this one who helped with the business planning. The children can be involved in all aspects of decision making, and some children might not want to be involved in all levels, but some children would welcome the opportunity to be involved in that strategic level and make the choice whether they would like to get involved or not. I think this is really important for both, you know, across the youth justice system, across all agencies. This service, we are, you know, it's been delivered to children, so they should be involved in the decision making, right from, you know, business planning and recruiting staff, very much interlinking with that other finding in terms of effective practice, where children wanted staff to be caring. So if they were involved in those recruitment processes, they would be able to see in terms of what staff and how they felt about staff and whether they thought they cared about them. At practice level, I think it was just about all decision making. So in terms of if there's going to be decisions made about children, make sure they're involved in those decisions. Children spoke about feeling that decisions have been made about them by just professionals reading about them in reports. They didn't want this. They wanted to be actually involved in those practice decisions. And then linking in with what I've just said there about making sure that the right people are recruited, professionals and volunteers. The volunteers was in terms of around children spoke about peer mentoring. In one of the custodial settings that I went into, they had a project going where peer mentors were being used, and they found that really helpful to them. They felt that people that had the experience of them, they felt could understand them more, had more empathy, whereas they felt that a lot of professionals didn't really understand what they had been going through. And we understand this is quite like an area of practice that probably then doesn't need further development and further research around it to find out the true benefits of working with those peer mentors. And then finally, in our findings, I think I've mentioned some of the inconsistencies across the youth justice system that need to be addressed. So positively, in youth justice services, it was mainly positive findings. Not saying there wasn't room for practice, but it does seem to be that youth justice teams have embraced child first, and they have been trying to implement the elements of child first. It became apparent that there did need to be more training and more guidance for practitioners so that they understood child first fully, especially the collaboration tenet that we've been doing research about. In terms of custody, it was mixed. I went into 3 custodial settings, all very different and all at very different stages, I would say, actually either acknowledging child first and implementing child first, and also that collaboration element and the experiences that children have. In terms of custody, it seemed to be very much based on, in terms of behavioural schemes. So the higher up the behavioural schemes that children were on, they had more opportunities to collaborate, which really shouldn't be the case. That all children should have, that should be a basic right, that they should be able to have some input about what's happening to them. Again, very negative views of the police, nearly enough all round. That there's a lot of work that needs to be done in police services across the country to ensure that they're acknowledging child first practice and embedding that in their practice. Children had some very negative things to say about how they were treated by the police. And then courts, very similar. They felt that there was a lot of power struggles and power play going on in the court system, very uncomfortable settings in court. And also in police stations as well, very environments not very child friendly at all. Social care was also quite a lot of negative things that children said about their social workers, about them feeling that they didn't really care and things being done to them instead of with them. So that's a flavour, an overview of our findings from this project. What I'd like to share with you now on the next slide. So that's me, the interpretation that Kathy and I gave, along with the help from our PRG. But when we were working with the PRG, they very much wanted to disseminate the findings through a rap. So what the children did, they looked at quotes. So you might, some of the quotes that I shared with you today on the screen, they actually used them as the rap lyrics, as well as putting some of their own words together. So if I go on to the next slide, I shall play you the rap that children developed, and we went into a professional studio to have this recorded. And then after that, Kathy will share with you some of the recommendations from the project. So here we go.
Trins. If you're gonna arrest me, then speak with respect. That's the 5-0, the one us and the rest. They got power on us because they're cops. They're aggressive and corrupt. They ignore us in the station, not giving us a right, man. It's not fair, nothing's gonna change. The lads locked up, they need to get them out of themselves.
Stop getting in trouble, join the army, get a car and run a flat. That's what I wanna do, that's the plan. I want to get my apprenticeship as important to me. I wanna get my apprenticeship as important to me. They are trying to help me, we're getting a job so I can earn some money. Earn some cash, earn some money, earn some cash. So I can fly out with my fam.
I thought it was shit, but it turns out it's lit. I like to play pool and listen to music. It keeps me busy and out of my pad. We get the opportunity to say how we feel, but nothing gets done, nothing changes. They need to listen, to take it on board. And what we're saying, you're just banged up. Yeah, you're just banged up.
Shout out to the yacht, they tryna get me a job to earn some peace. I thought they was joking, chatting to me, but it really helped me to live in peace. They always ask me what I think about stuff, encourage me to give views and stuff. They speak on me on a level, they don't chat to me like I'm a rebel. They don't chat to me like I'm a rebel.
If you're gonna arrest me, then speak with respect. That's the 5-0, the one us and the rest. They got power on us because they're cops. They're aggressive and corrupt. They ignore us in the station, not giving us a right, man. It's not fair, nothing's gonna change. The lads locked up, they need to get them out of themselves.
Hey.
Free the lads, yeah?
Get me.
Free the lads, cause we're squad.
Shout to the YOT.
Shout out YOT and
Like no cap outside.
Trins.
Oops. Over to you, Kathy.
Thanks. So, so that's a lot of the words that the young people used were coming directly from our participants. So we wanted to make sure that we showcase their voices very much in what we did. So some of our project recommendations really come out of that. A lot, all the sort of different layers of what we did. So we identified that collaboration needs to include a number of stages. It can't just be, people think of it as just listening or as just doing one bit. We need all of these things to happen. We need to ask them, first of all, for their opinion. We need to listen to what they say. We need to respect their opinion. We need to action their opinion. We actually rolled those into one to make 4, and we need to then inform them as to what's happened, whether points have been used or whether they haven't, if not why. So there needs to be a feedback loop. So all of these stages are really important for children to feel that they have been included, that they have collaborated, and missing out any one of those actually then makes the system not work and can make it worse, because if you ask somebody their opinion and then you don't include it or you don't listen to it, actually that can make the feeling of being not listened to even worse than if you hadn't asked them in the first place. We found that children very much had their own priorities, and their own priorities were very much to do with having a pro-social life. So they certainly weren't against the priorities of the youth justice service and youth justice system as well. But actually, if their own priorities were used to inform what they did then on their orders, it allowed their orders and what happened, or their voluntary intervention, what it was, to be future focused, to be focused on what they wanted to get out of life, and to be much more positive but relevant to each child as well. So we identified also that children really need to be involved in decision making at all levels. It's not just about asking them what they want to do on their plan, although it is that, but it's also asking them about how they can improve the organisation, be involved in recruitment, how they can maybe develop local policy and how it works, and at a kind of a national level, how they can be involved in that policy development in a non-tokenistic way. And I sometimes think we fall into the trap of being tokenistic, and we think that because they're there, we're including them, and they don't necessarily feel included even if they're there, if nothing is actually happening about what they say. So the next slide. So this idea of environment really came out very strongly. We started to think about what could be a child-first environment, because a child-first environment is one that facilitates this effective collaboration, and in the sort of the very nature of it, starts to neutralize some of those power imbalances. So it's about the people, who is in the room. Are they motivated by wanting to see the best for this child? Are they motivated by wanting to get a certain outcome, regardless of what the child wants? The children talked about having justice experience mentors, and they valued that, and they could see that somebody who'd been through something very similar to them, there was value in what they then had to say. Using creative methods might make them more comfortable to communicate in a way that they feel more relevant, that also, again, neutralises power imbalance. Collaboration, though, needs to be consistent across the whole youth justice service system. And as we said, there are pockets where it's really great, there are pockets where it's really not, and all things in between. And it seems to be very, very variable. And that's one of the issues that we have at the moment, I think. So we feel, of course we would, but we feel that our findings need to inform YJB standards for youth justice, case management guidance, and there's been a lot of work being done on that, particularly by Neil Hazel before he left the YJB, to really develop child first case management guidance, which is really excellent now. But we feel that there needs to be more done on this collaboration aspect, which maybe is the poor relation in this. The new standards for inspecting youth justice services need to be better on collaboration. We keep getting these sort of slight tweaks on how the HMIP are going to do their inspections, and they are getting better and better. But we feel that this, again, is still a poor relation. Youth justice workforce training needs to be informed by what we have found, so that it really facilitates the rest of child first practice. And of course, the design of youth justice spaces, because if those designed well and there is a child first environment, then some of the other things will sort of just fall into place. So one of the things that we found really is that the tenet of collaboration, although it's tenet 3, actually has the power within it to facilitate all of child first justice, because if we don't collaborate with the children and really involve them, we won't certainly achieve the first 2 tenets. So actually a lot of that depends on the quality and nature of collaboration in order for child first justice to be a thing, to be something that is the reality of children's experience. I think is that it? Yeah, there we are.
Thank you so much, Andrea and Kathy. If anyone has a question, please use the Q&A function on your toolbar. This is a webinar, and so sadly we haven't got an ability to allow you to speak or feature you as a delegate. But we certainly would love you to add a question or query. So we had one from Gary came through, which is a really interesting one. It was about police investigative processes. He said police investigative processes do not lend themselves to a collaborative approach. I agree. The environment and resources could be much better. So, interesting. What's your views on that, Andrea and Kathy? The investigative process itself.
If I maybe I can comment on that a little bit, and from a context of actually when collaboration started to be talked about in youth justice more generally and in youth offending teams, as they were called, it was seen to be almost impossible when you have a court order to make any of that collaborative. But I think actually we've found how to do that. We've developed processes that have made that much more collaborative in terms of its reality. And so I think we just need to not think that policing can't do this just by its very nature. I think we need to think about how can it be made to kind of address some of those issues and think about some of those recommendations if they were applied to the police environment and the way they kind of are involved all the way through that process.
I must also introduce a guy called Bill Hillier. He works for Avon and Somerset Police. I visited one of their centres at Keynsham. Basically, the way it works in Avon and Somerset, they have 4 processing centres for anyone who's arrested. And it's amazing to see a centre where they've got soft edges, good colours, fidget widgets. They are sort of, if you like, really thinking about how a young person or even an adult with autism or any neurodivergent tendencies is processed. So it can be done. Absolutely. Thank you. Another issue that's come up is this whole thing, and you mentioned it, and I suppose it's related to the way we talk to young people. About in 2020, someone raised the issue of what's called adultification. In other words, and it does seem to have a racial bias to it, but this whole process of adultification is where you expect more from certain children than they're capable of A, understanding, or B, responding to. So Kathy, Andrew, I'd love you to sort of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, go on, Andrea.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of Child First, by its very name, that is exactly what we're saying by this. It's a child, and children by legal definition are under 18 years of age. And so I think that is in terms of the very heart of this Child First practice is for children to be treated as children. And that the first tenet is, treating children as children and not treating them as adults. They're not mini adults, as Kathy said right at the beginning of this presentation. They have different needs. They have different developmental needs, different understanding levels. I know obviously you can put that through for adults as well, but they are different. Their children are very different in terms of, and I think that those understanding children's development, and children said that themselves when we interviewed them. Adults need to understand children. They need to understand those differences. So really, I think that's right at the heart of practice across the youth justice system. Is actually that training for adults that working with children practitioners to actually have that understanding of children.
Yes, and Gary raises being ex-police some critical areas here, because it's about safety and safeguarding throughout the system. It says being ex-police, reassurance is needed about where there is success, safe examples of where Child First practice works well and how, because his point is in parts of say for example Met Police custody directorate procedures, they are receptive to Child First principles, but it challenges custody best practice. In other words, having articles in cells, maybe iPads, fidget widgets, etc., they could also constitute a self-harm or a weapon. And so it's good to get a balanced view on this, because these are very real concerns for professionals who work in those environments.
And Maris, if I can just jump in there. So in terms of the interviews that I did, they were activity enhanced. So I actually managed to get some of these activities into the custodial settings. And right at the beginning, there was kind of quite a lot of blockages in the way. But what I found is if you're persistent and if you explained I mean, obviously there were certain things I couldn't take in, but in terms of those, just having a things like those fidget gadgets and a squeezy ball, kids love that, so that they had something that they could be doing while, you know, I was talking to them. And so I think that in terms of, I would say that if people are, if there's obstacles, I think to keep, you know, perseverance and explain why it's so important that these things should be allowed in some of the settings.
Yes, and I think one of the I'm a trained emotion coach. Emotion coaching, such a powerful tool with young people who can't self-regulate effectively. And one of the central tenets of that is you've got to connect before you can redirect. And I love that phrase because connection isn't just about telling. Connection is summed up all of those collaborative steps that you mentioned at the start. That need to connect to a young person before you can redirect. My final point, and then I'll ask Phil if he's still on, if he might have some points to make as well. I think for me, you used the word pro-social once. I would like to hear the word pro-social used 1,000 times a day in every single setting. Could you just explain what you understand by pro-social and how important this is?
Yeah, so in terms of the relationship of with Child First, it is about a child being assisted to develop towards positive outcomes, positive development, especially when they've had massive lack of advantage in their lives, and in fact disadvantage, abuse, and all sorts of things that have happened that have really stunted development and really caused harm for that child. Then there is a need to help that child to, you know, how can they develop on that pro-social towards a more towards a way of living that is going to actually result in better outcomes for them. And
Absolutely.
so it's
Yes.
not about changing them from being an offender to being a non-offender, and that's the important difference, I think, between an adult's focus and a child focus, because children very rarely have a hardened kind of criminal identity. They're developing in their identity, and it's about helping them to develop in a pro-social way, so that their identity develops as in a pro-social way, just sort of along that trajectory of development, rather than seeing them as some kind of finished criminal, which I think, honestly, you know, used to be the case.
Thank you for that. I'll come to Phil and then go to Louise's comment. So Phil, any reflections from your perspective, please?
Well, I enjoyed that very much. Thank you, Kathy and Andrea. It's really great to see some practical outworking of how Child First can happen in all kinds of different settings, and obviously great to hear some very positive comments about the work that Youth Justice Services do. Enjoyed that very much. We have in the Association of Yacht Managers, we have an annual award for innovation and good practice, and one of the entrants this year was a custody centre up in the far northeast, up in Middlesbrough, and it's a really, really interesting development where they've taken a completely separate area for children who need to be held in custody, and turned it into something that the children have helped to design right from the outset, and made it a much more suitable, appropriate space, I suppose. But yeah, I do agree with that question and comment earlier about, well, this is all very well, but how can you make it work in the investigation process when when police officers are dealing with some pretty difficult, challenging cases, such as some of the recent violent cases? How do you manage to introduce these principles in those kinds of settings? I'm sure we'll get there, and some of the headlines that you've told us about, I think, will help to shape policing as well as other aspects of youth justice practice in the future. So thank you. Andrea, I think you were going to say something there, weren't you?
Absolutely. Yes, Andrea.
Can I just jump in with that? And that's just something that reminded me of something what the children said about that process and being in the custody suite. They said that very often they were advised by their solicitors or legal team about the no comment. So in terms of it was
Yes.
directly opposed to what, in terms of the collaboration,
Yes.
they were told by legal professionals not to comment, just to
Yes.
do a no interview, no
And
comment
of
interview.
course, if that attitude continues, how can you collaborate?
Yeah.
That's a
Because obviously
really interesting point.
that definitely is a rub, isn't it? Because obviously children are told
definitely
not to comment, because it could then have an impact on the outcome.
Totally.
However, it goes against, in terms of what we are trying to support and promote, in terms of that collaboration with young people.
Absolutely. One of the nicest things we I think Phil and I have seen develop over the last 5 to 10 years has been what's called a communication passport. So youth justice professionals work with a young person to understand, if you like, it comes back to that point one of the children made about mental age, and talking to a child at the right age, understanding what they understand, knowing what they know, and using the appropriate language. So communication passports are growing in terms of their use within youth justice services. The final point today, Louise raised a point. When we think about the design of services, would we consider trauma-informed practice also? And more and more teams are really getting involved, not just taking it trauma awareness training, but taking it into trauma transformed practice. Any views on that, Andrea?
Yeah. So trauma-informed practice is almost sort of it has to be assumed within child first practice, because you're not going to have a child first practice which puts the child at the centre and their needs if you don't also incorporate in that what their traumatic experiences might be and the effect that that's had on them, delayed development, all sorts of things we know that trauma does. And so I think just within the fact that we are trying to do a child first approach to all kind of matters concerning children, will has to take into account all of that trauma.
Yeah.
It has to understand it, first of all, understand some of the effects.
Totally.
I think it comes as a surprise to some people that experience of abuse and trauma can actually inhibit physical brain development.
Totally.
So it's understand these kind of things, and therefore, knowing what that means in terms of how I might communicate with this child and what this child might need.
Yes, a good colleague of Phil and I, called Dr. Alex Chard, who's carried out serious case reviews, says don't rely on an assessment, which is a snapshot. Run a video of a child's life to really, truly understand. Guys, you've been amazing. Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you to everyone who attended. We had a wonderful attendance today. To everyone who's attended, you will get a video of today's webinar, plus the notes in PDF form. And we look forward to our next one in a month or two's time. So thank you, everyone. When the video stops, the recording stops, everyone's booted out. So please, we're not being rude. We've got one more new message that's just come in. And I think, yes, could we have a link to the research? So what I'll do is I'll ask for that to be included in the webinar. And it's a thank you from our delegates, a thank you from myself. And I think today's been a really enlightening session. Thank you very much indeed. We'll be closing the session now. Thank you.
Thank you.